I can say to my new Samsung Galaxy S25 Ultra, hey, find a keto-friendly restaurant nearby and text it to Beth and Steve. And it does without me lifting a finger, so I can get in more squats anywhere I can. 1, 2, 3.
Will that be cash or credit?
Credit. 4.
Galaxy S25 Ultra, the AI companion that does the heavy lifting so you can do you. Get yours at Samsung.com. Compatible with select apps. Requires Google Gemini account. Results may vary based on input. Check responses for accuracy.
At least one member of Congress has been busy on several fronts. She's co-authored a bill to keep federal buildings architecturally diverse, another to boost funding for air traffic controllers, and still another to give Homeland Security more resources for event safety. Nevada Democrat Dina Titus joins me now. Congresswoman Titus, good to have you back.
Well, thank you for having me. I've been called worse, so it's okay.
Well, I wanted to ask you, first of all, about the idea of architectural diversity. I'm taking it that this is in response to the Trump administration's desire to have, whatever it means, classical architecture and uplifting architecture for federal buildings. So what would your bill do, and what's your reaction to that?
Well, that's right. During his first administration, one of the things he did was to put out an order that all new federal buildings would follow the classical style. Now, that's something that dictators do, make everything look alike and in their image. I didn't think every federal building should look like Mar-a-Lago, so I was opposed to it. But it wasn't just me. The architects nationally were in an uproar because this went against long-time standards that had been set under John Kennedy's administration, where you use the latest in architecture style and you base it on the region. You make it fit with whatever the culture is of where the building is constructed. And you don't just pick one style fits all, because it certainly doesn't. A building that would look good in Santa Fe wouldn't necessarily look good in Boston.
The bill then would simply, give discretion to GSA, wouldn't be the architect of the Capitol, but GSA and maybe Veterans Affairs, which also has control of its own construction, that type of thing?
Well, that's right. And when President Biden came in, he immediately undid the executive order that Trump had put in place. So it wasn't a problem during his administration. But once Trump came back into office, he immediately had GSA conduct a study with a report due in 60 days. Now, we haven't seen that report, but we're pretty sure that it's going to be similar to what he did the first time and go back to that one style, whatever his definition of classical is. So this would just say that you will not have one style and will go back to using those standards of architecture that have been in place for such a long time.
Can we all agree, though, that maybe another housing and urban development or another, what used to be the health, education and welfare, now health and human services building, maybe we don't want too many more of those?
Well, you can certainly pick federal buildings around the country that you wouldn't want to emulate, but the classical style and the type of interior and decoration and all that Trump likes at Mar-a-Lago is really not appropriate for federal buildings either. It should reflect where they're built and the culture of the community that they are a part of.
Well, my grandmother had an adjective for Mar-a-Lago type of architecture and design. It was called hallucious. And so some of the people know what we mean by that. And,
I do. That's a good term.
All right. And then the bill that would help DHS special events program. What's that all about, and what would that bill do?
Well, in Las Vegas, we are having more and more major events. We had the Super Bowl. We have music concerts. We're going to have now a baseball team. We got soccer, basketball, all kinds of things where a lot of people gather that are often considered soft targets. And so we want to be sure that when people come to enjoy those things, they are safe. And this is true all around the country. Now, when you have a Super Bowl, you can apply to DHS to get Sears funding, which means you get more resources from the federal government, from bomb dogs to technology. But it's an arbitrary thing. You may get it, you may not. There are different levels. It seems to be kind of a capricious way to make policy. And I'd like to just kind of standardize that so people know what the requirements are for getting that federal assistance and that they're better able to provide it without going through a lot of rigmarole, bureaucratic red tape, and time spent getting ready for some of these events. It's all about public safety.
And by the way, we should note that on this bill and on the architecture bill, you do have Republican support. These are bipartisan measures.
Well, that's right, and that's important. Neither of those two things should be a partisan issue. Public safety at concerts, or, we had the worst shooting in my district in modern American history several years ago. We don't want to see anything like that repeated.
We are speaking with Democratic Congresswoman Dina Titus. She represents Nevada's 1st District. And then your third bill, I guess it's more of a letter, yet not really in law form or in bill form, but you are urging the fiscal 2025 appropriations, and we can talk about what might happen in 26, but to simply get more air traffic controllers trained and on the job.
Yes, I serve on the Aviation Subcommittee of Transportation and Infrastructure. And we've seen the real lack of air traffic controllers around the country for a number of years. And so when we reauthorized the FAA, I got language put in that we would hire the maximum number of air traffic controllers that the Academy could produce in a year because we were so short-handed. But that takes funding. Just because we want to hire them, you got to recruit, you got to find qualified people, you got to train them, and Congress has to appropriate the money. So, we were having an airplane accident a week practically around here, and up until now, the U.S. has been the standard bearer for safety, but there are a lot of problems that we need to address, and air traffic controllers is just one of them. When they had the accident in Washington, it was shown that the tower was not fully staffed. Now, they haven't said that's what caused the accident, but it is a real fine point to say, look, we need these air traffic controllers. You get in the plane, you want to know you're going to be safe, and you'll get there like you're supposed to.
Yeah, it's amazing how many ground sight and ground incursions and crossing of runways and clipping of wings and so forth is happening on the ground, which may not be necessarily a disaster in terms of lost life, but it sure is a disaster if you're trying to get from point A to point B sometimes.
Exactly. Now, the Secretary of Transportation has said he wants to hire more air traffic controllers, and I totally support that, but the devil's in the details. We want to be sure he doesn't decrease training for those air traffic controllers. He doesn't go after the union when he starts talking about hiring more, and that he's willing to really put the funding in the budget that will be needed. So it's the right statement. Let's be sure he does the right action.
And what's your feeling, just looking ahead, on revival of an idea to change the structure of air traffic control such that the FAA becomes an oversight body and air traffic control operations are done by some external entity, whether it's contractors or a nonprofit corporation? This has come before Congress before, and it had bipartisan backing. It even had union backing, and yet somehow it kind of died on the vine.
Well, that's right. Several years ago, that was before the subcommittee talking, and it's a step towards privatizing, which you're seeing in so many of the different federal agencies, from the post office to the IRS. But the arguments then were that this is something that is so essential to be provided, public safety, air safety, that we really shouldn't leave it to the private sector. And so we didn't go down that path. But you're right, it did get some bipartisan attention, and I wouldn't be surprised if it came back.
Well, Great Britain, Canada, Germany, they've all outsourced it.
Well, that's true, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we should do it. Didn't you remember when your mother told you just because Johnny did it doesn't mean you should do it too?
Well, of course, too often I did it anyway. But then the second question I had following, the idea of staffing the FAA is modernization. And the Secretary